On the second day of Christmas, Bridget brought to me compassion and justice. Today is the feast of the martyrdom of Saint Stephen, and he is the first recorded martyr of the faith that was not Jesus. We're going to be talking about him today because I think his legacy is complex, problematic, and instructive. So let's talk about compassion, justice, and Saint Stephen as we walk together down creation's paths. Hello, everyone. My name is Charlie. I am a Christopagan druid and priest of Frigid.
Everyone, my name is Brian. I am a Christopagan druid and competing with the Dougies click-clacks.
Today, we're going to be talking about the martyrdom of Saint Stephen and what that has to do with our understandings of justice, compassion, how to stand up for yourself. Because I have notes about Saint Stephen. I have thoughts that they're not all kind. But before we get to that, if you haven't already, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, whatever the terminology might be on the app you're currently listening to us on. We do original Christopagan and Druid content 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And for the 12 days of Christmas, we're doing one episode every day for all 12 days. So you don't want to miss anything because we've got a lot of stuff planned. With that said, let's just get into it. Saint Stephen is the first recorded martyr of the Christian faith who was not Jesus. I find it weird when people call him the first martyr. I mean, technically, yes, but I mean, Jesus was the first martyr, really. What is a martyr? Martyr literally means witness. That's what the term originally meant. And the idea of martyrdom developed a lot in the first 3 centuries because there was a whole lot of martyrdom going on. Sometimes it was because Rome was doing things. Sometimes it was because of riots and various clashes with other groups that were doing things. Sometimes it was because Christians were killing other Christians. There's actually a really good chance that St. Valentine was killed by a Christian mob, but that's a whole other story in and of itself.
Maybe we'll touch on that in February.
Maybe. So in the book of Acts, we have recorded the story of St. Stephen's martyrdom. Stephen was not an apostle, though he was one of the early disciples and was a very radicalized one. I don't know how to say this without being misconstrued, because I'm very often misconstrued when I talk about the problem that I have with the martyrdom of St. Stephen. Prior to Stephen being stoned to death, the crowd picked up rocks and hit him with them until he was dead. We have recorded a sermon, a street preacher sermon that St. Stephen was giving. I do believe that it is important for us to speak truth to power. I am not saying that you shouldn't be speaking truth to power. But having said that, that is not what St. Stephen was doing here. He was on the verge of anti-Semitism. I have an issue with this passage because Stephen is attacking the Jewish citizens of Jerusalem for having killed Jesus, for having murdered their own Messiah. And he makes an interesting argument of that Jesus himself is recorded as making, that many are recorded as making, that this is just the fate of prophets. All of the prophets have a martyrdom story. Very few of the prophets lived to a ripe old age. Most of them were killed by the community that they were sent to minister to. In fact, some of the most interesting stories of Elijah are when he was running from the very government he was sent to talk to that was tried to kill him.
This is why the guy goes, "Don't shoot the messenger." You'll see me blurt out laughing because it's the funniest joke ever. Traditionally, the messengers got shot. They were the ones that were martyred.
My issue is it is part of the blood libel that is put on the Jews, that is put into Stephen's mouth. The Jews did not crucify Jesus. The Romans did. And it's not the Romans that killed St. Stephen. It's the Jews. So I have issues with this story on just a basic level, that I feel that some aspects of it were at the very least augmented to take in the era of anti-Semitism that was rising in the Christian movement as it was trying to differentiate itself from the Jews as a result of the Bar Kokhba's rebellion. That bothers me in this story. I don't think that can go unremarked in this story. I think it way too often does, because Stephen is factually wrong about what happened, in that the Jews did not have the power to crucify. That is a Roman form of execution. They Jews did not crucify. They stoned people like they actually do to Stephen at the end of the story. I don't want to say that his martyrdom was justified, but if a guy goes onto the street and makes an anti-Semitic rant in a very Jewish neighborhood and they pick up rocks and throw them at him, not saying that that's justified, but it's an understandable reaction to what happened to him. I don't think that that's what happened. I think this is an embellishment of the story. If there even was a historical St. Stephen, this is the only account we have of him. I feel like we have to start there because all of the St. Stephen story is about martyrdom. The very sermon that he gives that he is martyred for is about martyrdom. And that's actually where I want to put the focus. It's not on him getting stoned to death for possibly picking a fight that he really should not have been picking in the first place, because he was yelling at the wrong people, but on what he was actually saying. Because there is this problem of us shooting a Malcolm X or Martin Luther King. Gandhi was assassinated. We have a long history of doing this to prime ministers who make peace in certain Middle Eastern countries. And I say that very vaguely because it happened both in Egypt and in Israel. And we have a problem with people who are doing the justice. Even in our own country, Lincoln was assassinated. The slayer of robber barons, they didn't succeed in killing him, but they shot Teddy Roosevelt because he was out there campaigning again for real reforms. After being drummed out of his own party, he was still out there fighting for reform, and he got shot.
Malcolm X was shot and killed.
RFK was running on a very progressive platform that would have brought justice, or at least tried to bring more justice to our country, shot while running for president. We have a tradition in this country and in this world of, oh, you're trying to help people. Bye. That is deeply problematic. That really, to me, if I can take a message out of what St. Stephen was saying, that's what the sermon Stephen was saying was about. All of the prophets that he mentions are prophets that were very clearly saying, you're so worried about making sure that all of your rituals are right, you've forgotten about the poor. You've forgotten about the hungry, the widow, the orphan, the stranger in the street. You've forgotten to take care of your neighbors.
As the current phrase goes, they forgot the reason of the season. Literally, the actual point of why all of this.
And that is something that we all need to remember, is that we are here to take care of each other. It is hard to do that in our modern world because this layer of capitalism, which I do talk about a lot, it is a problem because it puts profit motives above people. It puts your responsibility to make money over your responsibility to be a good person, a decent person, to do the right thing. It is more important to make a profit than it is to heal or help other people. It is a root problem in our society, and was even back then. The kings took all of this money in taxes. They weren't using that to fund social systems to help people's lives out.
So they could have opulent palaces.
Large militaries so they could murder people that slighted them or to increase their power base.
Tons of servants to take care of every whim and wish.
And that's still, in too many ways, the world we are living in today. Of course, people that are entrenched in that kind of power don't want to give it up. The best way for them to do that is to convince people that do not have that power to think it's perfectly justified for them to have that. And this, to me, is the moral of St. Stephen. We need to look for those people who are speaking up for the poor, for the oppressed, for those who are less fortunate than ourselves, for those who are the downtrodden. Jesus tells us that his, and by extension our ministry, is to help the crushed, to feed the hungry, to give water to the thirsty, to clothe the naked, to visit those who are sick or imprisoned.
The story of St. Stephen becomes a wonderful juxtaposition of how not to do justice making and compassion versus Jesus' story of how to do justice making and compassion. For instance, if you're trying to reach a MAGA person that you're very concerned about, you don't go into the middle of the MAGA rally and start calling them all murderer and inciting them to violence. That's the St. Stephen method, which is wrong. That's not compassion. That's not justice making. It doesn't get anything done. It just gives an example that they can point to entrench them further in their beliefs.
Which is what happens.
Which is what happens. they get further entrenched in their beliefs. The compassionate way would be to sit down and have a one-on-one conversation with a person. And yeah, it might be slow, but you know what? That one-on-one conversation, you can actually get them to address their actual pains, their actual concerns as a person, and to help them see through the other lies and the distractions and details that have them caught up. That hopefully then they can see that though their anger is probably justified, they can then point it in a constructive way.
So I see this as a juxtaposition. And I don't know that it was intended to be seen this way, but I live in a death of the author world where I don't have to worry about the original intent of the stories as much. It's striking to juxtapose. St. Stephen talks about the ministry of Christ and how he was killed by the people that he was went to save, and they stone him dead on the street. Just a few chapters before, Peter gives this a similar sermon, and it says that thousands converted to the faith that day. Now, his is also tied to a miracle. It's the miracle of Pentecost, so that everyone heard him in their own native language, down to their regional accent and dialect. It's the miracle part of the story. But his story is one of inclusiveness. It's one of bringing people together. He brings up the prophecy in Joel that in the last days, my spirit shall be poured out on all flesh, and your old men and your old women shall dream dreams, and your children shall prophesy. And today this has been fulfilled in your sight through the power of Jesus, whom you crucified. Like he even tacks on that attack that Stephen does to his. But it's one line. He's bringing people in. He's calling people in. And to me, this is the difference between where people misunderstand me when I talk about this. I'm not talking about we pacify those that we are opposed to or that those who are doing actual harm. But name and shame doesn't work. We know the psychology on this, like the science is that when you shame someone, it tends to entrench them in their beliefs and in their actions. When you try to guilt people into doing something or out of doing something, it tends to cause them to dig in and root in further, because it either invokes the one forbidden thing where, oh, I'm not allowed to do that. Well, I'm going to do it anyway. Kind of one forbidden thing aspect to our psyche, which is very much there, or just that sheer defiance of, no, you're not going to tell me how to live my life. But this name and shame ideology just doesn't work. And I think we see that in the martyrdom of Stephen, especially, like I said, juxtaposed with the sermons Peter gives before this, and the sermons we see Paul give after this. Paul gives some firebrand sermons in the same book, and they don't always end with, and everybody applauded. The Peter one ends with, and then everybody applauded, right? Which,
yeah,
that's an embellishment in the story too. But he is not stoned to death. He's eventually arrested and brought into custody as a Roman citizen, and that's the rest of the story in that book. But he's not just immediately killed on the spot. And it's because Paul and Peter are trying to meet people where they are and bring them into the conversation. When Paul is on Mars Hill, he starts his conversation with, as I was walking in here, I saw an altar that said to the unknown God, because y'all are trying to appease all of the gods, and you know that there are gods that you haven't remembered to put an altar down to, so you put down an altar to the unknown God so that any God that's not specifically mentioned here, you got them covered too. I'm here to talk to you about that God, the one in whom we live, move, and have our being, and as your prophets, your poets have said, we are all his children. You see, he's quoting Greek and Roman philosophers back at Greek and Roman people. He's trying to bridge the gap. He's trying to bring them into community with him. Peter is trying to bridge that gap and build community in his sermons as well. Stephen is putting up walls.
Yeah.
And then the walls fall down on him and he dies.
That really is the important lesson from all of it. When you're able to break things down to their base elements and learning to speak the language of the person you're talking to. And I don't mean I'm an English speaker, they're an English speaker. I mean, words have meaning, and that's not the same meaning. It means something different to each of them. So you have to learn how to use their words that their meaning applies to. One of the examples I found so powerful when applying in my own life, I was interacting with a group of hillfolk. There are people who are literal to a very extreme.
Yeah.
Like their nearest neighbor is measured in miles. There's not a lot of, they were taught from the imperial church, gay people were bad. But the thing is at the core, people want to live a good life. At their core, most people are good. Most people want justice. And they know what injustice is if they can see it. Most time they could see it and go, that's injustice, and understand it. Knowing that and understanding their language, I was able to have conversations with them where they could see that, like them, I just wanted to have a good life. I wanted to have a spouse. I wanted to have a family. I wanted to live a good life and to be left alone by some imperial structure, government or whatever, because that's something that's very much in their language, because they want to be left alone to live a good life in the woods. So they can understand they don't want others to tell them how to live. So instead of trying to tell them how they should live by accepting me, I told them that no, I'm like them. I want the same thing. I want a good life. I want to be left alone. It is unjust for anyone to tell me how to live. It's unjust for anyone to tell them how to live. And next thing you know, they're going, hell yeah, raising their beers, cheering it on, and ready to ride or die, fighting for my justice just as much as their own justice, because I was able to talk to them in their language. Now, if I had gotten up and gave some sermon about how I'm going to force them to live like me, yeah, like Stephen, I'd have been stoned.
This is one of the reasons why the earliest episodes of this podcast that we did together, when we decided to earnestly do this podcast, a lot of those episodes are us defining terms. That way, in future, when somebody's misunderstanding, we can point back and go, oh, we did an episode about that. It's why when we start a topic, the first episode we do about it is just defining terms, because we have to be using the same language. If I'm using the word pagan to mean a specific thing and you're using it to mean a different thing, we are not using the same word. If I'm using the word God, which I use, to mean this animistic, panentheistic God that I worship, and you're using it to mean an old man in the sky,
the big stick ready to use it, and all the naughty,
we're not using the same word. These are two different words. It's one of the reasons why we seem almost obsessed with defining our terms, and why most episodes start with, let's define our terms. Like this one, let's define a martyr. Having that shared language is really important. Making sure that we're using the same language is really important. Because what I keep finding in my discussions with others is we are talking past each other because we're using the same literal word to say different meaningful things. And that is a problem, because we have this bias that makes us believe that everybody is speaking the same language. That if you speak English, because we're sitting here talking to you in English, that my use of these English terms is the same as your use of these English terms. Just me saying English, I of course mean American Standard English. I didn't say American Standard English, but I meant American Standard English. I'm not talking about British Standard English, or Australian Standard English, or South African Standard English, or New Zealand Standard English, or African American Standard English, which are all dialects of the same language. We share many features in common, and there's a good bit of flow of words going back and forth, but a lot of these words do not mean the same between these just Englishes. And that can be broken down even further. There are words that I would use on the East Coast when I lived there to say certain things, that I would use different words on the West Coast because those words were different. This is very obvious in words like, is it soda? Is it pop? Right? We can talk about regionalisms like that.
Is it a sub? Is it a hoagie, or is it a grinder?
On the East Coast, there's a very big difference whether you're talking about the foliage or the leaves. A lot of other places, those are synonymous terms. But if you're living down in the foliage belt, from Pennsylvania down into Virginia, where tourists come just to see the beautiful fall foliage, there's a distinction in the language between the foliage and the leaves. It's a distinction that is not made anywhere else in the country, from my experience. And so you might come to that area and talk about the leaves. And while they will technically understand you, one, they will automatically know that you are not from the region, regardless of your accent. And they will take subtle jabs at you, because the leaves are what happens after it hits the ground. It's foliage while it's on the tree. Leaves when you have to rake it up. And that may sound like a subtle difference to you, but in this area where there's a lot of deciduous trees and a lot of leaves falling, it's an important distinction. And it's one that's used to mark outsiders. There's a lot of language like that. We talk past each other all the time because what we mean by compassion is different. When I was raised in a conservative Christian home, telling somebody they were going to hell was seen as a compassionate act. Because why would you not tell somebody that they're going to hell? Wouldn't it be cruel to just let them go? Oh, it's so foreign to me now to even try to get into the mindset to remember what that was like. But that's seen as a compassionate act in these people's hearts. We know the harm that they're doing. We know the manipulative tactic that is. And so we point that out and they're shocked. I remember being shocked the first time somebody told me that when I was young. Like, I'm not trying to manipulate you. I'm trying to save you. We're not using the same word to mean the same thing. And so we're constantly talking past each other. One of my favorite examples about this is if you ask people in our country, do you like Obamacare? They say no. If you ask them if they like the Affordable Care Act, they say yes. They're the same thing. Exactly the same thing, just two different ways to refer to it. These are the kinds of arguments that we're having. We're talking past each other. Compassion means to share someone's work. It's literally, compassion is to share in someone's labor. Literally what that word means. To labor with, to have passion with. If you take the word passion to mean suffer, to suffer with. Depending on which era you're wanting to pull the meaning of the word passion from, right? When we talk about the passion of Christ, it's the suffering of Christ. You have to get into other people's mindsets to do that. And we can see this erosion of compassion and how it's harming our quest for justice in how people are currently talking about the past. You can't talk about the past without having compassion for the people who lived there. There are a lot of things that we take for granted now that they did not know that. That does not justify any of their wrong beliefs. But they're working from a completely different fact set than we are. Yeah, when Darwin started talking about evolution and when early science was starting to talk about speciation and stuff, we had very little idea of what that means. I still think today we have very little idea of what that means because technically a species is two animals that can't have children together, and yet Tisleys exist. So are they separate species? Like if you can hybridize and have fertile offspring, and by the way, Tisleys can, that's a cross between a grizzly and a polar bear. Are they a separate species? Do we really know what a species is? So of course they had weird ideas of what species were back then. And they were trying to apply it to everything because it's newfangled. It's fresh. It's new. Does that justify them trying to say that there were multiple human species? No, they were wrong. But they also kind of weren't, because now we know that Neanderthals were human. Like there's a big question, like were Denisovans and Neanderthal species? Like were there like three subspecies of Homo sapien? Maybe? Were they the same species? We were able to interbreed and have children with each other. A large chunks of the population have Neanderthal DNA and Denisovan DNA. Were those three separate species? Were they subspecies of each other? So there was a point in our history when that was true, where there were literally Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens running around. Not true now, because we mixed. We made something new. We made something stronger, something better.
It's why I really enjoy the phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Most apply that in the nanner, I told you so manner, which fine, whatever, that's one way to apply it, but it's robs a lot of the deeper meaning one could get from it. Because from a compassionate perspective, it's understanding that those intentions could have been good. Now, the results could be bad. Like phrenology, for instance, the intention of wanting to have an empirical way to measure good and evil, I can understand that desire.
Wouldn't that be
So
lovely?
easy. Yeah, if I could just scan somebody with a scanner from a phone app that would measure and be able to tell me their goodness ratio. That is amazing. And I would love to have that. But you know what? I also can have the understanding that that was their intention. The results were bad. So now we either just need to be done with it and let it go, file it away for later. Maybe we will eventually have that kind of technology later on.
I doubt it.
I doubt it. If somebody's still stuck in that phrenology mindset, now at least understanding their intention, I have a bridge to talk to them, to reach them, to help them, and I have a path because I understand now that they either need to let it go or show them a better way.
You're afraid of crime. Okay, crime bad. You know what helps crime not happen? People getting a decent wage. People having the basic fundamentals that they need to survive. Most crime is people trying to figure out how to survive. You want to eradicate crime, put it into the universal basic income. Make sure everyone has food on their table and a roof over their heads. And a lot of crime, not all crime, because some crimes are crimes of passion or greed. So not all crime. See, people want to make everything into a universal. You're saying all crime will no, I'm not saying all crime will disappear, but you're not going to have a lot of the shoplifting where people are just trying to steal food, medicine, trying to steal basic toiletries, clothing so that they have something to wear. A lot of that's going to go away.
Yeah, because we're also recognizing that when they go, but all crime, once again, that's a path of purity, and purity is problematic.
Purity does not exist, and where it does, it's often harmful and dangerous.
Yeah.
Pure oxygen will burst into flames. We don't want pure oxygen, even though we need oxygen to survive. Pure water is toxic. You will die if you drink nothing but pure water. You need the minerals and the other things that are in the water to keep you alive. Purity is a dangerous, dangerous thing. I remember when Obergefell happened, sitting and talking to a lot of other queer people and trying to warn them, because I was excited. We were finally going to be able to get married. I was very excited. And I remember sitting with a lot of other queer people. I was at a panel at a convention at the time, and we were talking about it. And it was very clear, we need to be careful. Change scares people. Any change. Doesn't matter if it's good, bad, indifferent change. Change in and of itself. Paint your house a different color. People will stop and be like, are you okay? Like, just change in general. Like, that's the most neutral change that you could do, right? Change scares people. Cut your hair differently. Watch how people are like, are you okay? Right? Any change. And big changes scare people. And I was like, we need to make sure that we're talking to people and making people understand the changes that are happening. And the response I got from the audience that I was at, this lefty, queer, confirming audience, was, good, let them be afraid. No. And I tried for years to argue, look, I'm not saying we have to be incrementalists. I'm not saying that we have to slow roll everything. I'm saying we have to get people used to the changes. We have to get people used to this. Trans people are all the story now. So afraid of trans people. Ugly Betty, family show, had a prominent trans character on it, played by a cisgendered woman, but had a prominent trans character on it. Nothing. Nobody peeped back then. It wasn't an issue. It is an issue now. It was made into an issue because we didn't let people get comfortable with the ideas. That is the real work of compassion. Getting people to understand, why is change happening? Why are we changing things? Why are things different now? Because no one wants to be the bad guy. No one wants to feel like they were wrong. These are the two most universal things. I think all of us can understand that. I don't want to be wrong. I don't like having it pointed out when I'm wrong. I need to have it pointed out when I'm wrong. I will eventually get to gratitude, but there's going to be that moment of, how dare you? And no. And then the research happens and, oh yeah. Like, you go through the stages of grief, denial, anger, the whole thing every time you get pointed out, because we don't want to think of ourselves as bad people. And if we had a bad idea, because we conflate our identity with those ideas, oh, that you're saying I'm a bad person. That's a natural way for people to think. And what we have to do with, like, the story Brian was telling, if we want compassion to happen, if we don't want to be St. Stephen, is find ways to get people to understand, oh, no. You just, in a lot of instances, were manipulated. These people were trying to take advantage of you. Not the easiest route to take, but sometimes the best route to take. But get people to understand, you're not a bad person because you had those beliefs. I was raised in a very racist, sexist, misogynistic, homophobic, queerphobic in every possible way culture. I was raised very conservative Christian. Very. I remember family members using the N-word, hard R, no remorse. That's how I was raised. I remember having those feelings of, am I the baddie? When I started deconstructing that. Deconstruction is hard work. Deconstruction is hard work. And if we're going to really show compassion, we have to be those people that are out there helping people through that deconstruction work. No, you're not a bad person because you've had a homophobic idea and put in your head. You're not a you're a bad person if you've acted on that homophobia and hurt people. You need to make amends and restitution for that, right? But just because you're transphobic doesn't make you a bad person. If you're out there using your fortune to oppress trans people, you're a bad person, Miss Rowland. Say you by name. That's the difference. That's the difference. If people have been misinformed, we need to find a way to have a shared truth again, because we're operating not only with different language, but we're operating with different sets of facts. I can't tell you how many people I've had arguments with over they're doing this or that to this or that group of people, and there is not a factual basis for that claim. But somebody that they see as having authority said it, so they believed it and have put it into their belief system. That's compassion. That's justice making. It's not going, you did the bad thing.
Oh, why are you throwing rocks?
Nobody likes being told you did the bad thing. But people love to learn, and people like to see themselves as the hero.
So if we can construct our narratives
in ways that help people feel like they're learning, growing, and being the hero. That's why I think a lot of the save the planet stuff works for ecology a lot more than the it's bad to not recycle, it's bad to, the mossy earth, like we're restoring a natural landscape kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I want to be a hero. I want to help the animals.
For most people enjoy the beauty of nature.
Yeah.
And being able to go, wouldn't you rather have this beautiful landscape than this ugly one?
So if you want to actually change somebody's minds, find ways to make them want to be a hero and do not just cast them as a villain, unless they're actually being a villain.
Even in most villains' cases, break it down. Their intentions may be right, so that it's just getting them to understand that the road is taking them to hell. Their intentions might be a good drive. They put them on a different road.
Yeah.
Help them get onto a continually off ramp from the road to hell and go a different path.
I know I'm going to hear this in the comments anyway, so I'm just going to put it out there. What's your take from the story of St. Stephen? What do you think? I would love to know in the comments. I can already see he misunderstood. He should have called them out. He should have said all the things that he said. He's absolutely right because he's a martyr and a saint, and saints are perfect. Okay, sweetie. I've heard you already. I'm answering you here. I will not be answering you in the comments. Sure, yay. But if you have any other thoughts, please let me know in the comments. If you're listening to us on YouTube or Spotify, you can leave a comment right there. If you're listening to us anywhere else, they will not let us know that you did a comment. So you can leave a comment there because engagement is magic. And then head over to creationsfast.com and click on chat, and you can leave a comment there. I really love talking to y'all, and I can't wait to hear what y'all have to say. You can also tell us your thoughts on justice making and what you're doing to help spread justice and compassion. I would love to know that too. While you're over at Creations Fast, if you have a few dollars you pass our way, you think about joining a membership. We have monthly and annual memberships over there, as well as I think they called it a legacy membership, that is a little bit bigger gift that you can give to help us out. Or you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. I am CE Dorset on both. All that does is help us, keep a roof over our head, keep money on the table, keep food on the table, and the power on. It really does help us out a lot. We do this out of love, but we really would like this to be our full-time job. And thank you to everybody, including our latest annual member. Y'all are amazing. Alrighty, as we're heading out, let's go to one of my favorite martyrs, because there are quite a few that I absolutely love. But my favorite has to be, Saint Isaiah, who tried and tried and tried to get people to hear that they needed to take care of each other and not be so interested in how they could one-up the many imperial states around them, taunting them and bringing their wrath down upon them. Help us to see that God wants our compassion, not our sacrifice. That God wants us to take care of the least fortunate and not be so blinded by our religious duties. That we should be about giving kindness as the root of our faith. Amen.
Amen. And a partridge in a pear tree.